and get started. We recognize that right now is an incredibly stressful and hectic time, not just here in Williamson County and Middle Tennessee, but throughout the country and the world. So we want to, we recognize that you took your time out of an incredibly busy schedule to be with us today. We appreciate that. We want to make sure that we are bringing you valuable content that will continue to be pertinent and relative to the work that you are doing. I think it was maybe early January that we began conversations with Jill Robinson over at Belmont, asking if she had an expert who could come and speak with us around inclusion and diversity in the workforce. Belmont has been an incredible partner of ours throughout the years with economic development, and we can't thank them enough. And Jill has been fantastic. But we obviously had no idea when we started this conversation in January where we would be now. And I do think it's incredible that this specific topic could not be any more relevant or on point, as one might say, than it is right now, given the current climate and culture that we are experiencing. And so I am incredibly excited for our speaker today. I'll go ahead and welcome Sarah. Sarah Fisher Gardial is with Belmont University. She actually joined Belmont as the first female dean of the Jack C. Massey College of Business. Her mission is to strategically advance the college and Belmont University through initiative collaborations with faculty, staff, students, and local, national, and international businesses. She's originally from Hot Springs, Arkansas. I have to say I was excited to see that. Most of my family is from north of Little Rock, and Matt, our CEO, has spent quite a bit of time in Little Rock early in his career. So we're all pretty familiar with that area and with Arkansas in general. So that was exciting. As we started talking through this, I'll be honest, she has a really impressive bio that would take half the time to read, so I'm not going to do that.
Don't do it.
But what I do want to do is share with you something that Nathan Zipper on our team, and I'm risking I might embarrass him, when I asked him about his experience with Sarah at UT. This is what he said. He said, I can tell you that in terms of helping me think through those critical post-graduation decisions, she was probably one of the top 5 most influential people in my life. That she's back in Tennessee is a tremendous win, not only for Belmont, but for the entire state. And as someone who is a huge fan of Nathan's, I can tell you that spoke wonders to us and to the entire team. I don't want to spend any more of this time with me talking. I do want to move over to Sarah and have Sarah begin this conversation. And I will say we're going to keep this open for questions. So Sarah's going to talk for a while, and then at the end we will go through some questions. I think there's a little tab at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to submit those there, and we will get to as many of those as we can. Sarah has warned me that being from academia, she can be a bit long-winded, so we'll get to as many of your questions as possible at the end of this. But without any further postponing this from on my part, Sarah, Dean Gardial, we'd love for you to join us and begin your conversation.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. I am really thrilled to be with you all today, and I want to thank the Williamson County Chamber for asking me to be a part of your conversations about how we're going to continue to make this community stronger. I can tell you that as an academic, but specifically an academic in the College of Business, I have always had a foot in 2 camps. And one is, how do we educate the workforce of the future? And I do believe that that is part and parcel of our job. And then secondly, how do we improve the communities that we reside in? I don't think universities can be takers. I think they need to be partners in how communities move forward. And so for me, the question is always about what do we need to be doing together? So the opportunity to reach out and connect with people more broadly in this, what will return to be a vibrant economic community, is just a really great opportunity, and I want to thank you for that. I parachuted into Nashville and back into Tennessee, and Nathan, thank you for that. Those wonderful warm words. I am winning. You know, I'm so excited about being back here in the land of grits and biscuits that I can't tell you. I loved the Midwest. I love the Big Ten and the Northeast, but this is home. And when I'm here, every bone in my body just says home. And so I'm glad to be here. not knowing when I accepted this job in February that I would literally on day 2 in my new home have tornado sirens going off in the middle of the night. And then I was here the last week, the students were here, we sent them home for spring break, and 3 days later we said, don't come back. And we had just a couple of days to turn everything that we did into a 100% online format. And we were challenged, and we scrambled, and we did what we needed to do to get it done. But we are now asking the same questions that I think every organization in the country needs to be asking right now, whether you're a for-profit, whether you're a nonprofit, how do we move forward? And specifically, what we're going to talk about today is how is diversity a part of our conversation about moving forward. So let me start by telling you a story to kind of set up the impact of diversity. And then I'm going to come back to COVID, what's going on right now, and how that's going to impact how we think about diversity in the workforce moving forward. I think I have the ability to share my screen with you right now. So, got it? Are we there?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm going to start with a picture here, and this is a particular company, Kimberly Clark, and as you can see, here are all the products that they sell, and there's largely a lot of paper products for consumers, both commercial and at home, but paper towels, Huggies, pull-ups, Kleenex, feminine hygiene, all kinds of paper products out there. They are huge in this category, and they have been a global company for decades. I think that's important to know. This is not a US company. The thing that is interesting, and why I bring them up, why I bring Kimberly Clark up, is this. Someone just shouted out here, I hope your mics are all open. Who do you think buys 90% of these products out in the real world?
I think most of us are muted, so this is Elizabeth. I'm going to say maybe it's businesses or women.
Women. Okay, so on the commercial side, on the consumer side, definitely it's women. And up until very, very recently, it would maybe surprise you to know that Kimberly Clark had 0 women in leadership positions. In a product category that is primarily consumed by women, there was no voice of women at the table when they were making strategic decisions, when they were making product decisions, when they were making market entry decisions. And in fact, that is not an unusual thing in this country. McKinsey, in a report not too long ago, said that 97% of the US companies have leadership profiles that fail to reflect the diversity of the country's labor force and the consumer market. And so Kimberly Clark was not alone in this. The story then proceeds when the leadership said, we've been talking about diversity for a long time in this company. We've been probably talking about diversity for 20 years. And yet, year in, year out, as we look at the leadership at the top of this organization, it has not changed. The diversity there has not changed. What's going on? And they took a look, and what they discovered was not only were all of their leadership at that time and for decades before, they were all men, they were all white, they were all engineers. They had, in fact, all come from and been promoted from the exact same factory in Appleton, Wisconsin. Okay, you can't get less diverse than that. The narrowness of the perspective and the pipeline that brought that talent forward literally had not changed in decades. And in fact, I've got a picture here. This is the founding fathers, Mr. Kimberly and Mr. Clark and a couple of others, and that is in fact the Appleton, Wisconsin factory. And so what you see here is a very historical picture, but the truth is, if you zoom forward into 1980s, 1990s, not much had changed. And so what we need to talk about is why that didn't change for Kimberly Clark, and then kind of broaden that out for the rest of us. So let me just say this. Kimberly Clark made some assumptions when they decided to really, really get on the diversity transformation program. And one was that they were done talking. They had talked for 20 years and there had been no change at the top. And so talk needed to become action. They also believed that someone needed to be held accountable. If no one has responsibility, and if no one's performance is going to be evaluated on an outcome that's important to an organization, you all know as well as I do, nothing happens. Nothing can happen, nothing will happen. And there was no one in Kimberly Clark who had accountability for change. They also decided that their hiring and promotion processes had to change. If the only way to get to the top of Kimberly Clark was to be an engineer who all happened to be white and male, but who all happened to come from the very same factory in Wisconsin, they were never going to get diversity at the top. And in fact, they looked and they saw that there was diversity at other places in their organization, but the diversity, whether that was ethnic diversity or gender diversity or whatever, happened to be in pockets of the organization where there was never a prayer for those people to get on the leadership pipeline or ladder to get to the top. And so they knew that they had to go back and look at their processes for hiring, how they brought people into the pool and broaden that dramatically, which they did. And I could get into that a little bit more, but I just want to continue with this. Because only men were at the top, men had to take responsibility. You know, you can always bring in that token woman or ethnic minority to head up HR or your diversity initiatives. But the truth of the matter is, if you're in a majority primarily or a majority only organization, nothing is really going to change until the people that are there at the top start taking those changes on themselves. And in this case, it was men. So what I want to show you is, if you go to the Kimberly Clark website today, you see pictures and slogans or type like this. Our values, being innovative, accountable, authentic, and caring, drive our culture. And our behaviors enable every employee to live and bring those values to life. We believe the more our workforce looks and thinks like the people who use our products, the more likely we are to ignite change. What I want to tell you is, more so than changing the website, Kimberly Clark had to change the entire culture. They had to change the entire process by which they recruit and promote people. And ultimately, that diversity started making changes in the performance of the company. And this is I think, an important message that I want to transmit. We can make these changes for a whole lot of reasons, whether they're moral or ethical or spiritual or affirmative action or whatever we think is guiding us. The truth of the matter is that these days, changes such as this change the bottom line. And in the years since Kimberly Clark has gotten more diverse at the leadership at the top, they have outperformed their competitors by a long shot on virtually any measure, whether it's growth, whether it's market share, whether it's stock performance price, whether it's the financial performance. They literally started taking off at the point when they started doing things differently. And so what I'd like to do is spend some time talking about how we can all use this crisis, not waste this crisis of the pandemic, to start thinking about and doing things differently. You know, I read an article. This was actually very early in the pandemic. It was probably in early March. And it said, we will come out of this pandemic as different people and different organizations. And the two institutions, if you will, that are going to change the most are business and education. So I'm on the education front, and we're spending a lot of time talking about what those changes are going to be for us. I'm just wondering if we can open up the mics a little bit. Courtney or Abby, tell me if we can't do this. I'd like to hear what your assumptions are about how things might change in the future for your organizations. What do you see coming? How do you see the needs of your organizations changing?
If you're an attendee, if you'll use the chat feature, or you'll see a prompt on your screen that the host will like to unmute you.
No? All right, here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna jump in here and answer my own question because I know Zoom is a little bit awkward in terms of doing this. This is what I'm seeing, hearing, reading, talking to organizations about. I think that there are some things that are going to change in the post-COVID world for any organization. And again, whether this is for-profit, nonprofit, government, all of us are in the same boat. I think we're seeing the breakdown of the old. I truly believe that books are going to be written about these months as a pivot point. And we're going to have a lot of conversation about before and after. How we did things before, and then how we changed to do things after. I think we're seeing not just systems that are breaking down in terms of the way we communicate with our customers, the interactions that we have, the way we do collaboration within the workforce, the way we work internally. I think that we're seeing some breakdowns in government right now, and in terms of some things that just aren't working anymore that we need to figure out how to repair and work to move forward. The generational shift and the generational divide around this is very real. We already know that the millennials are the dominant generation in the workforce. That will only grow, followed by Gen X, Gen Z, those kinds of things. This pandemic will usher them in big ways. The new workforce, this new generation, does not want to do work the same way we do. And so the pressure to flex, to work remotely, to kind of relax the way that we've always thought about doing business is going to be very real. And I will tell you, when that really came home to me was a couple of weeks ago when I was talking with a person that's on my advisory board here that works for Bassberry and Sims, which, as you know, is a venerable traditional law firm, not just here in town, but across the country. And what he said is they are starting to consider how they do things differently. And I will tell you that the lawyers are going to be the last ones in the world to change. And if this is causing them to rethink what their office buildings look like, how their partners interact with their clients, boy, it's very rampant in the environment right now. Moore's Law, which is the change of technology that will continue to increase rapid technological change in terms of how we interact with each other. I think it's a brave new world. I think there are a whole lot of organizations that don't really know what it's going to look like, and we're going to be trying and doing creative things. But the bottom line on this is that as we move forward in the next months and years, innovation and creativity are going to be essential. If the way that we've done things is in the past is broken down, then how do we do things moving forward? And no one has that answer. We have snitches and themes about it. What we really need to do is get very creative and innovative about how things look in the future and build that future, because it's not apparent what all the answers are going to be. So in a post-COVID world, I think the need for innovation and creativity is going to be stronger than it ever has been in the US and in our organizations. I
wanted to chime in and just let you know the chat section has actually gotten pretty busy over here. So we've had comments, everything from there's going to be flexible work environments and hours will become normal. One person said we anticipate a fully remote organization. We also anticipate online learning and engagement. Someone else said flexible work environments and hours will become normal. And then there's so much that is going to change: speed, agility, new leadership competencies, ability and willingness to change, technology, etc. So quite a few people who are thinking obviously about this and the change that it's going to have for them and in their businesses.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And so I guess what I would say at this point is that you're right. All of these changes are coming. If we're at that pivot point that I'm talking about, what I would say is it doesn't serve us to continue to do the things the same way we've always done them, to bring the same mindset, the same perspective, the same experience and background to the tables that are making decisions about the future, we must throw a wider net and a more diverse net to get more perspectives at the table. I'll give you some research on that in just a second, but I want to just say something about this slide. Organizations are becoming very flat now. You know, we can trade information across organizations around the globe. We are all one Zoom away from that person at the top, or getting a collaborative group together that cherry picks from different people in the organization. In a world where we're trading in information, we need more collaboration than ever, and we need more diversity than ever. So let me give you some research to kind of back me up on this. And I want to just make sure that we all understand that when I'm talking about diversity, I'm talking about diversity and inclusion. Diversity is understanding that everyone has unique strengths and recognizing those, and not saying, well, you know, I'm colorblind. It's actually the opposite, saying, man, I want Technicolor. I want to see all kinds of diversity in the organization, because that diversity suggests different strengths and suggests different perspectives and creativity. That's what diversity is valuing people for their differences. Inclusion, on the other hand, my favorite quote is, diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. You can't just bring people into your organization and check a box that says we're more diverse if those people aren't at the table, if they don't have a voice, if they aren't a part of the conversation about how those organizations are moving forward. And I'm going to say diversity, but just having diversity in organizations is not going to get us there. We have to have diversity and inclusion. So think about some of these things. Whoa, I don't know how I got out of that. Sorry, moving forward really quick here. Okay. Back in 2014, we've known this research has been out there for a while. This is not new news to any of us that teach in business. Financial Times said, if you have diverse teams that are working inside your organization, the benefits that have been shown over the years by research are plentiful. Not surprisingly, you get more different kinds of experience at the table, more viewpoints. Really importantly, you avoid groupthink. You stop doing things the same way you've always done them. Imagine all those guys sitting around the table at Kimberly Clark, all those engineers from Appleton, Wisconsin. Do you think it was possible that groupthink prevailed when they were making decisions? Probably, because they all had this literally the same background, the same work experience, the same cultural norms that they had been brought up with. The last thing that you want in an innovative, creative environment is any kind of groupthink. You get improved decision-making and problem-solving, more effective teams working across what I'll call, quote, borders in your organization, and diversity creates diversity. The more diversity you have, the more diversity that attracts, and it's just almost a very fulfilling do loop here. Let me point out that almost every week that something comes across my screen that shows one more instance in which diversity has led to organizational performance. Higher returns on equity, expanded market share, improvement in business performance, financial returns above the industry average, higher sales and profits. So all those things that Kimberly Clark saw happen when they literally did become diverse, there's a bunch of research to back that up that's gone on over the years and across numerous industries. And I think this is really telling. Korn Ferry did a study that said, you know, almost all global executives understand that diversity and inclusion can boost their results. So, you know, I have my own feelings, my own personal feelings about why I think diversity is important. And, you know, we each can view some things in different ways, but business performance is really, for a lot of people, where the rubber meets the road. And I will tell you here, there is no debate. The research is all, you know, completely aligned around this fact that diverse leadership, diverse organizations have better performance. And I think that's very compelling. So if we know that, if we know, and we've had the studies and the case studies like Kimberly Clark, and years of research in this that are all leading us to the same conclusion. Why aren't things changing? I think that's the bottom line. I don't think there's anyone out there anymore that's arguing that diversity is not important. We all know that it is. And I hope that everyone knows that diversity will make for better organizations. But here we've got a picture of men sitting around the table, maybe a board of directors back in the 1800s. And below that is, I pulled this out of an annual report from 2007. There actually is a woman in there. You have to look really hard to find her because she's dressed up like a man. She can't even look like a woman in this picture. And it turns out that if you get into the annual report, you find out that she's over HR in this organization. So we know exactly where that's going for her, and it's not to the top. More to the point, there's an organization called Catalyst, and they look at a number of dimensions of diversity, but I'm going to show you their data on women in particular at the tops of organizations. And what you see there is their 2019 data on the percentage of women at the tops of the S&P 500 companies. It's a little depressing if you think about, very close to 50%, over 40% of all the workers going into organizations are female, but the closer you get to the top, the more quickly that percent declines until you get to the top, and it's very rare still to see women at the top, at CEO positions, CFO positions, those kinds of things. Here's the even more depressing thing about this. Those numbers, that trend that you see there as you move up in organizations has been almost identical, very, very little change since I was an undergraduate in business school. And ladies and gentlemen, that was a long, long time ago. And so I hear people look at that and say, well, this will change over time. This will change. And I'm saying, you know what? I was sitting in, MBA classes in the early 1980s, and we were looking at these same numbers, and we were saying, oh, this is going to change. I'm looking around the class at women like myself. We're going to get out there. We're going to be coming to the top. And it literally hasn't happened in decades. And so we have to get more serious than just saying, well, over time, this will improve, because we now know that it doesn't. So let's talk a little bit about how we move forward. I want to make some comments about this, and then I'm going to open this up pretty quickly to some conversation and some chat questions. Let's talk about what's not working. This is from a paper that was done by Deloitte back in 2017. And they said, first of all, we've got to change our criteria about what we look for when we go out to hire somebody. Because if our criteria, if our job descriptions, if our job responsibilities and experience aren't changing, the pool that we're drawing from is not going to change either. And there's been studies that show, for instance, that when you're hiring individuals for boards of directors, many times one of the requirements is that you've already sat on a board of directors. All right, there is a self-fulfilling prophecy. If there are mostly men, and there are by a long shot, that are serving on boards, and you have to hire people with board experience, you're going to continue to hire more men than women, period. And, drop the mic on that one. A lot of times we'll hire based on recommendations from the leaders in our organization. Who are they most likely to know? People a lot like themselves, that they went to school with, that they have social relationships, those kinds of things. And so, if we keep getting trapped into doing the things the way that we've always done, and kind of not shaking up our traditions, we're not going to get where we want to be. They also say that if your hiring criteria and if your hiring process doesn't specifically include, we are looking for and we value diverse skills and disruptive views, you're not going to get there. And Deloitte went back and actually looked at the hiring criteria and standards and requirements that were in job descriptions, and they found that only half the time they were seeing companies even mention diverse skills, diverse perspectives, diverse experiences as something that was desirable. And so if we're not putting it out there, out front, and saying, this is what we're looking for, and by the way, those become really positive things during the recruiting process. Again, we're just going to continue to get the same thing. Policies and practices, which limit our pool. I mean, this is exactly what was going on at Kimberly Clark. You know, we always hire from this same particular pathway up through our organization. One of the things that they had to do to change that was to start doing cross-training across their middle managers and giving folks that were coming up from a lot of different areas in the organization the opportunity to change jobs, to broaden their experience, and to create a broader pool of people who were available to go to the top. Because, you know, going back to the same kind of traditional pathways was simply not going to get them where they wanted to be. So you need to look at your hiring policies, your hiring criteria, where you advertise, how you bring people to the pool, how you discuss people once they get into the pool. It's that old definition of insanity. If we can just continue to do things the way that we've always done them, we will continue to get the same results. We can't expect to get anything different. And so I think Deloitte is very clear in their report is, if you really want to change, if you want to stop talking about diversity and really start behaving and changing the diversity, then things have to change in your organization. Change is complicated. We could spend a lot of time talking about this, but this is only to say it's not just hiring policies and practices that hold people back, people of color, gender differences, culture, organizational policies. Biology holds people back. We could have a whole discussion here about men having more testosterone than women. Turns out that that's kind of a risk-taking hormone that causes men to be more excited about jumping at opportunities even when they don't know everything they need to know. Women don't have that. They naturally hold themselves back and think, if I don't know everything, I'm not going to put my hand up. All right, that's biological. Could be some personality, but literally we're wired in our bodies that way. Unconscious bias is something I want to say something about in just a minute. So this particular overhead is to show that once you start changing your organizational policies and practices, there are still a lot of things in the outside environment that are going to hold people back. And you don't get on this train and expect to quickly get to your destination. This is years and decades of movement that will get us where we need to be, but we cannot just turn that switch overnight and all of a sudden become the diverse organizations that we want to be, because there are so many other pieces in the world that are holding our workforce back. Let me just jump on one that happens to be a bit of a hot topic for me. During COVID, we are having, understandably, some conversations about the fact that some of our employees are having a hard time working at home because they don't have daycare anymore. Once the daycare shut down, we found out that there are a whole lot of folks that have trouble coming to work either, you know, on site or remotely if they don't have access to childcare. Childcare in this country is a real problem for us. Most people don't have access to good quality, reasonably cost-effective childcare. And the fact that we haven't, we've let this run through companies. Childcare and people's access to childcare is largely a fact that childcare is a private industry out there. Companies can support it or non-support it, but we don't have a fully fleshed out, a fully formed system of childcare in this country that makes sure that everyone can get to work. I'm just going to stop there and not get political. This is a fact, and I know you're running into it right now. Until we decide as a country to work through this, there's going to be a huge impediment. And by the way, that impediment will hurt women way more than it does men. We know that to be true. Women still hold more of the child care, family care responsibilities in families. And so just to say, we've all got our piece to do. Your organization has its piece to do, but we're fighting a battle on multiple fronts here. I'm going to skip through a lot of this and just hit on one more thing. I hope your organizations are talking about unconscious bias. This is the bias that basically allows us, without thinking through it at a conscious level, to bias the decisions that we're making towards some groups better than others. Let me say, everyone has unconscious bias. Men and women have unconscious bias. Black and white employees all have unconscious bias. We all have unconscious bias. They come wired into us from our cultural frameworks. An example of some of the research that's been done on this is if you give resumes to the hiring leadership and organizations and change nothing else but the name at the top in a way that indicates male or female, or maybe indicates black versus white, the hiring decisions change. The most negative interpretation of that is that there's a conscious bias and people are literally actively keeping those people out of the hiring pool. The reality is, for I think the majority of people, the bias is unconscious. Interesting, women, you need to know that you have the same unconscious bias that men do. Women still will make the same hiring decisions that men do. So there's a lot we have to do in terms of training in organizations to unravel that knot through education, through awareness, through training, through blind hiring that helps us screen out the kinds of things that might be creating unconscious bias and keeping people out of our pools. I think there's a lot of work to be done on this. And so I've already mentioned this. I could come back if we want to dig in a little bit more. This is how organizations are going to need to lean in. I'm going to stop on this and then we can talk. I think you need to have serious conversations about the unique skills that diversity brings to the workplace and value those as assets to your organization. There's a lot of research out there that can come to bear on the power of women in the workplace, the power of bringing more ethnic diversity, international diversity, those kinds of things into the workforce. I think we're going to have to support and normalize family-friendly policies in the workplace. Right now, we've decided that this isn't the government's job. We have to run it through individual hiring organizations. And until we do things that support families in the workplace, 50% of the population, meaning women, of all ethnicities are going to be disadvantaged in the workforce. And we can decide to tackle that, or we can decide not to. But we're going to have a self-fulfilling prophecy either way on that. We've got to go back and revisit everything that we do in the hiring process, from how we write the job description, what terms, what adjectives that we use. We know that there are certain kinds of things that are turn-offs to certain groups that will cause them not to want to apply for jobs. We've got to look at what we're asking for in terms of the experience that they're bringing. We've got to look at the outcomes, look at our channels of hiring and saying, you know, if we're bringing in 40–50% women into our organization, why aren't they succeeding? Where are the breaks in the pipeline where they leak and all of a sudden they're starting to exit instead of moving on up through the hierarchy? This leaky pipeline issue is one that's huge in academics. There are many areas in which we bring in men and women at equal percentages, and then we find that they don't progress and they don't get to those leadership positions. And we've got to go back and say, where are we losing them and why? We've got to champion the individuals in our organization who do bring us diversity through support, through mentoring, through leadership, through championing them for job opportunities, growth, promotion. And we have to train on unconscious bias. That's kind of my short list, and it's a lot for any company to take these on. But until you're doing these kinds of things, you literally are going to be in that same do loop that we found Kimberly Clark in. And even with the best of intentions, even with all the conversation being the right thing, we want more diversity. If you aren't literally doing things differently, then that channel is not going to change for you. So let me just stop there and see if someone maybe can read me some of the comments or questions off of the chat, or if individuals want to speak up and talk at this point, I'd love to hear from you.
Opening up the Q&A now. So if anyone has questions, you're welcome to put those in there. I can also read from the chat. I actually have a real quick question for you while we're waiting for others
Sure.
to post. I'm curious about going back to this childcare issue. If it is, and it is truly a societal and cultural issue, but are there things that our individual businesses could be doing in order to help in this process, in order to, and I do think that more than ever, it's become blatant and obvious. When you've got employees who literally cannot come back to work simply because there is no childcare right now.
Right.
And so I'm curious if you've seen companies who've done this well, who've responded well, or if you just have recommendations for them.
Couple of things that I've seen. You know, the most extreme are the companies that have started their own childcare internally, and that's just not an option that's available to anyone but, you know, what I call kind of a major organization, right?
Right.
That's fabulous, and I will tell you that in organizations that have those in place, and I've been there, oh my gosh, their employees are happy, 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 right? Even though they might be charging for it, right? But it's there, and all they've got to do is bring the kid to work, and then they're paying for it from there. Some organizations will also do a child care supplement. If they don't have the child care built in internally in the organization, one of the benefits that they might provide in terms of a kind of a cafeteria of benefits is that you might choose or elect to have some kind of tuition support, if you will, for child care. And by the way, if you don't believe that childcare is expensive, I guarantee you that the in-state tuition for the University of Tennessee in Knoxville is less than the vast majority of childcare providers in this state.
Right.
All right. This is no small thing. So, you know, some kind of support is the other thing. And then the third thing is, I would say, look at your policies that might disadvantage women who need more flexibility to stay home occasionally, to do things around what I'll just call family care. But I will tell you, Elizabeth, it literally came up for us last week at Belmont, because we're starting to bring people back to work. And someone said, you know, what do we do about these people who can't come back because their child care has not reopened? Can they continue to work remotely? And the answer that came back from HR was, well, they can take vacation time or they can take FMLA. And I said, well, two things. One is that burden will be borne by women. They will be the ones taking their vacation time to stay home, not the men. And we just know that statistically. But the other thing is, your lowest paid workers in the organization cannot take FMLA because it is not paid leave. And oh yeah, you can stay home for 3 months without pay. Well, you know, your minimum wage workers in organizations, and for us, it would be food service or some of our entry-level admins, or, you know, those kind of folks literally cannot access FMLA because they can't stop their paychecks. And so you've got to look at your policies that you have in place, and someone will say, well, you know, doesn't this work for everyone? And we have to say, no, it's not. And here's why. And think of what the solutions will be when the policies that we have in place aren't workable.
Right, right. Another question we have here is, what can we be doing while the company is on a hiring freeze to move the needle forward?
Oh, that's great. You know, I think I said earlier, don't waste a crisis, right? And we're all in one right now. There is no better time to revisit these things that I'm talking. If there's a hiring freeze, right, you don't have to stop any of your hiring in process to ask these questions. Now is the time to review and adjust your hiring practices before you open that door back up. And, you know, there's going to be a lot of pent-up demand for employment. We know the employment's high. We know that there are people out there that are very anxious for people to start hiring again. So once we open those doors and start bringing the employees in, it's too late at that point to start thinking about whether we should be changing things or not. Do it now. And so that when you do fire that engine back up, you're doing it in a different way, on a different base than you have before.
Right, right. That's incredible. Absolutely. We've got a couple questions here that are very similar, so I want to get to those. And
Sure.
how do employees implore their leaders that unconscious bias training is needed? And I feel like that also flows in with another question where it's how do we begin to influence the all-male leadership in our companies that may or may not see diversity as a strength? Is there a good resource or data pool that makes the business case for diversity? So similarly, topic questions there around unconscious bias and then also influencing our leaders.
Yeah. You know, not surprisingly, I always like to start with the business case, which is to say, this is a bottom line issue for you. This is not a do good issue for you. There are a lot of great articles out there that pull some of this research together. And I think when businesses start understanding that they literally are leaving money, leaving performance on the table when they're not diverse, I think that gets their attention maybe in the way that other things do not. The other thing that is interesting that I will tell you is that when I have been able to speak to organizations about the power of diversity and the consequences of diversity, the first people that beat a path up to the podium afterwards to say, how do we change this, are fathers of little girls. I think that we have a generation of men in the workplace who highly value and highly support the ability of their daughters to go out and make their way in the world and be leaders. And once they start understanding the ways in which those doors are shut to them, they get very anxious about how are we going to change this? That we can't let this continue. But in general, I would say start with making the business case, and I can send you a list of maybe some specific articles that you want to share. I would say the second thing I would say is peer-to-peer works a lot better than you might imagine. And if you know organizations in town or anywhere that are on the path of diversity, and you can get those conversations going on leadership to leadership, that's probably much more effective than a bottom-up conversation about it. And so, engage the network in the town, in the community. One of the things that you might be able to do, Elizabeth, is to start identifying where are the organizations in town that are doing some amazing, different, progressive things around diversity, and have them start talking to their peers. And so, you can bring in someone like myself, what does an academic know? You can try to, get some conversation going from the bottom up, but the peer-to-peer network is very powerful if you can work it.
Right. We've got another one here. Can you please elaborate on the statement that there are certain parts of the hiring process that turn some groups of applicants off before they apply? More importantly, what should we include to engage a more diverse pool?
Yes, yeah, there's some really interesting research on this, and I should be able to pull up a whole lot more examples, but I'm just going to give you a couple. One is, if you just put in the hiring description and your job requirements that you're interested in someone who has experience managing and promoting diversity in organizations, you'll get a different pool than if you leave that phrase out. Just that phrase alone signals to people, oh, they want someone like me there, right? In a way that they don't when they don't see it. And so there are certainly some things that you can say in your job announcements, your postings, your descriptions that signal diversity is important in this organization, and that is a magnet for diversity. I said this, diversity draws diversity. The other thing is, I think that you need to be very careful about job titles versus job skills, right? If you put titles in there like, vice president or executive leadership, those kinds of things will cause women and and diverse candidates to look and say, well, I haven't had those kinds of jobs, so I can't apply. If what you want really is not just someone who has had that title, but someone who has a particular skill set and some experience to share, those will draw more people in because they can see themselves in the descriptions where a job title alone sometime will set up a barrier in their mind. We know this in particular for women. If they look at a job description and don't feel like they have already had experience with the majority of the responsibilities that are outlined, they won't apply, but men will.
Right.
So think very carefully about how you're describing the kind of person that you want, what kinds of things that you want them to do, and to stay away from the things that are kind of traditionally worded, X years of experience at this particular job title or whatever. Years of experience also is another thing that will turn people out. If you put 5 years out there and they've got 4, they're not going to apply. So.
Okay. We've got another question here. This one relates to, and it's very important because many of our chamber members and investors are small businesses, but the question is around the small versus large businesses and the unique differences or opportunities. So what do you see for small businesses that they may face that the large organizations don't?
Well, resources, right? For sure. If you're a startup, you are not likely to have as much of a fully fleshed out HR function, right? And have the ability to bring in someone to put diversity programs in place. You're wearing a lot of hats in smaller organizations, and you just don't have that bench strength to set up specific programs around diversity. So, it's not surprising in some ways that Deloitte and, IBM and these Coca-Cola and these big corporations have these beautifully planned and implemented diversity plans, but they've got a lot of resources to throw at that. You won't have that. And so, the thing that you do have, however, is the ability to be more nimble than a big corporation, to make decisions faster, to make changes faster, right? So you can literally make things happen in a quicker way if you decide to start changing the way that you're doing things. But you're going to have to tap into, for instance, some training resources, whereas some of these bigger corporations will put their own programs in place on unconscious bias. I'm very big on the training on that. There's a lot of it that's out there that's free. And so what you're going to need to do is find ways to access the training around diversity, around unconscious bias that is out there and available to all kinds of organizations. Maybe you pay for it to be brought in. Maybe it's available to you at a very low cost.
Okay. And then we've got a couple more questions I want to get here. One is, how do you measure your progress? And I would actually like to add a little bit to that. How do you measure it on not just diversity, but on the inclusivity side as well?
Yeah. If you're just looking at numbers and checking boxes and percentages of certain kinds of profiles that you want to hire, you're never going to get there. I'm very big on engagement kinds of surveys that let all of your employees talk about how willing they are to say they're to invite other people in. Those kinds of engagement surveys are very important, and then break them down by gender, by ethnicity, and if you can, to look at whether there are differences. We've done this recently in the organization that I just came from, and we found that the level of satisfaction with the working environment and the ability to recommend it to other people varied significantly by gender and ethnicity. Those are huge signs to you. And so once you've done the hiring and said, you can't wash your hands and say, we're done, you may have to go back and look at those issues of inclusivity and saying, what are we, in fact, developing a culture where people feel valued here, where they feel like they're invited to the table? So it really is a much broader set of metrics that you need to look at, and not just payroll headcount. Okay, everything's frozen up for me. I don't know what's going on with the rest of you right now. Now, there you are. Are you back, Elizabeth?
Oh, I was going to say, I can't tell if I'm frozen or if you're frozen.
Well, I thought you were frozen, but maybe you thought I was frozen.
I am.
Okay, okay. Any more questions?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, uh-huh.
Oh, this is unfortunate. Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. I don't know what happened. So we have one more question here,
Okay.
And we knew that this was going to happen. I will warn you that it's from one of our journalists, Matt Blois. So Matt says, I've been thinking a lot about the recent demonstrations against police brutality. How will those protests change the way that organizations think about diversity? How can companies show minority employees that they are committed to racial justice and equality? He also notes that he knows it's not COVID related, but it's rapidly changing our world. And he felt like it was a relevant question to ask.
Absolutely. At a time like this, the voices at the top of the organization are critical. And if there is silence from the leadership of the organization in light of the fact that, you know, we've had this really traumatic set of situations in our community, that silence speaks volumes, doesn't it? The first thing that has to happen is the leaders in organizations have to speak up and send out very quickly a message that says, this is where we stand as an organization. This is how we feel about what's going on, and this is the world we want to try to move into and create. We just got such a message this morning from the president at Belmont. Those kinds of things that we're seeing now, you know, in op-ed pieces in the, you know, the media are very important, but there is no substitute for the person at the very top of the organization using this as an opportunity to take a personal and organizational stand. And I would say that's job one right now. I believe there's a deep wound in the community around this, and all communities in our country around this. And the healing starts when the conversation starts and when we open ourselves up for dialogue. And that is step two. And that those conversations start in organizations. They don't necessarily have to start in the streets. They don't necessarily have to start, you know, in the middle of the protest or the riot. Start having conversations in your organization about how to do things better there. I'm reminded of a movie that I saw about how the coral reefs are bleaching all over the world. And it was a documentary, and we were all sitting there watching it. And after it was over, the director of the documentary came out, and a woman said, you know, was like kind of crazy, like she was inflamed over, oh my God, this is terrible. How do we stop this? And he said, start where you are. Individuals can't stop the bleaching of the coral reefs around the world. Start where you are, in your location, in your organization, in your community, and work from there.
Right. Yeah. I'm reminded of two things. One, I'll say I'm the mother of two little girls. And so I do hope that your point of affecting change in our leadership and the women participation on boards, that those happen before they are at an age where they are trying to get jobs. But I'm reminded of a song that was shared with my 5-year-old. Her class shared it this morning. And it was actually around getting out and being in nature and building and doing art. But it seemed so on point with where we are right now, which was my little hands will change the world. And I thought, yeah, her little hands can, and maybe my little hands should do something too. So with that, thank you, Sarah, so much for your time today. Thank you for this incredible information. I know that my feed and the chat feed have been blowing up with people saying how much they have appreciated your time and the knowledge that you've shared. I am certain we're going to want to have you back to speak at one of our other events. So thank you for that. All of you who are on the call still, I noticed many of the names are similar to the ones who end up attending our HR calls. So don't forget that tomorrow we have another HR roundtable. It will be a Q&A style. Starting at 11 a.m. we'll have Kelly Hodges. She's the market vice president with Gresham Smith. And then John Wingo is an attorney with Stites and Harbinson. We may also have another HR generalist on that call to be able to talk through changes and things that are needing to happen in order to make way for re-entry into the office workplace. So while much of the community has reopened, what we found is that many of our offices have slowed that process because they have been able to work from home or work from anywhere, as we talked about earlier. So with that in mind, people are making plans now for what a re-entry would look like. And we're hoping that this conversation will lead to some true strategic planning and processes for you to help guide you through that process. Sarah, thank you so much. Everyone, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
Jill Robinson, if you're still on the call, thank you from Belmont for being an incredible partner of ours. We truly appreciate all that you do for our community. Have a great day.
Hey, guys. Hey, Elizabeth.
Yes.
If you want, I will email you if you want to this presentation, and you can make it available to folks if they're interested in it.
Absolutely. That would be fantastic. We can absolutely post that on our website, one of our HR tools. That would be great.
Okay, happy to.
Yep. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.